Hello Infiniteers, and welcome back to my Tron toy box. Today I will show you how to hook up the logic for the battle when the player exits the canyons down there, as well as the logic for the I.O. tower over there. And that will wrap up the logic for this part of the toy box, which began in the light cycle arena way down at the other end of the toy box and continued through the canyons. Before I get started, let me remind you that I have logic diagrams on my blog that may help you out. The link will be in the video description, and the diagrams for today's episode are a continuation of the diagrams from the last two episodes, episodes 9 and 10. The logic diagrams in these three episodes all connect to each other, and I tried to explain that on my blog and show that by highlighting the new logic toys that I introduce in each episode using a different color. So you may want to refer to the logic diagrams from today's episode as well as those from the two previous episodes as we go along. Okay, let's start by reviewing the new creative toys that we need for today's episode. I have added two enemy wave generators and some locators down here out of the end of the canyon. And you can place yours anywhere you want. I kind of placed mine in different spots around here, kind of facing towards the exit of the canyon. And the exact placement of these doesn't matter if you're following along and building this on your own toy box. But you want some down on this end, some on that end, and some over there. And to save a little bit of time, I have hooked up each of my enemy wave generators here to 5 locators down there on the ground. Okay? And each of these are going to be configured the same way. So I've configured these with 5 elite Sakarans. And under the properties, we're just going to take the generation delay to 0. Leave all the other properties the way they are. And this one's configured the same way. To save some memory on my system, I'm using all elite Sakarans. So I've got 10 of them. 5 with each of the enemy wave generators. And again, take the generation delay to 0. Okay, up on the I.O. tower, I have added this pressure plate from the gameplay toys. It's the Kiln pressure plate from the Escape the Kiln 2.0 toy box game. I put that right on top of the pedestal. Alright, so I had added this trigger area last time. As you come out the end of the canyon here. And all I did with this last time was just hook it up through this logic gate over here to take out the cannons, the turrets inside the canyon maze. And now this trigger area is going to do a few other things. So the first thing we will do is on the trigger area, a new logic connection when entered by player any. We want to generate both of our waves. And bring the enemies in. When entered by player any. Generate that wave. And on one of these, doesn't really matter, but we'll use the first one. We'll do a new logic connection. When the wave is generated, we'll come back to our trigger area and deactivate it, because we only want to do this one time. Okay. And then, one more thing we want to do to save some memory is once the player exits the canyons, they don't need the light cycle anymore. So on here, we're going to do a new logic connection when the trigger area is entered by player any. We're going to come back to the vehicle summoner that the player used way back here at the start of the game. in order to create their light cycle. And we are going to remove all. And that will take the light cycles out. Light cycle or light cycles, depending on how many players you have, or how many times the player pressed the button. But that will remove all of the light cycles. And then the player will battle the enemies, or not. They could make a run for it, and then they come over to the I/O tower and scale the tower. So the next part of the logic here is at the I/O tower. And when the player steps on the plate here, there's three things we want to do. So we're going to do a new logic connection. When this is activated and the player stands on this, first thing we want to do is rotate the toy here so that the player can get over to the hangar. And if the player is going to do that, they won't be visiting that ground area anymore. So if they did happen to run past the enemies and not defeat them, we should take those enemies out to save memory. So we'll come back over to each of our enemy wave generators and defeat the waves. And we'll come over to the other one and do the same thing. And there we go. That is it for the logic on this end of the toy box. Okay? And since this episode is a little shorter today, let's take a quick look at the logic over at the very beginning of the toy box. And then all of the logic for the ground areas will be done. And once again, I've placed a few Creativa toys over here ahead of time. So down in the little starting room where we begin, I have placed 2 object generators and 2 locators here between these 2 little pillars, as well as a player counter. And again, I haven't hooked these up, I've just placed them out of the Creativa Toys drawer. And then up here, I have placed some locators. And the little blue dot on them is facing over here where the player is going to be coming out from that lower area. And I have placed a trigger area and just dropped that right here. Okay. And then for the enemy wave generator, I went ahead and connected that up to all 5 of these locators using the new locator connection. And to save a little time, I configured the wave here as well. This is using 5 Sakaran gunners. And once again, we'll come into the properties, take the generation delay to 0. All right, but let's start down here in the little starting room. So we're going to connect each of these object generators up to the corresponding locator here. And we're going to use the level starter to kick that off. We had placed the level starter up here back in, I think it was episode 8. So we're going to do a new logic connection on catalyze. First thing we will do is come over here to our first object generator. And under the packs menu, we're going to select the identity disk. And that will generate that at that locator. Now we could do the same thing for the second one, but I thought if we don't have a second player, what's the point of that? So that's why we have the player counter here. So this time, for the second one, for a second player, we'll do a new logic connection on catalyze. We'll come over to the player counter. And we're going to query the number of active players. And on the player counter, a new logic connection. For the query result for the number of active players, if we have 2 players total, then we want to go ahead and generate the second identity disk. Now you don't really need this if you're going to be playing as Tron or Korra, but putting these here allows you to play as any character. Alright, so you can play as any figure you want, and you give them an identity disk and they can do all the fancy throws and de-resing the enemies and all that stuff, just like Sam and Korra. Okay, and at this point you can move these 3 toys below the train to get them out of the way. So that starts the player off with an identity disk if they're not using one of the Tron characters. Now on this trigger area, when the player comes through here and exits those caves, we want them to face their first enemies. So on here we're going to do a new logic connection. When entered by player any, we'll come over here to our enemy wave generator and generate that wave. And again, we only want to do this once, so on this enemy wave generator, a new logic connection. When the wave is generated, we will deactivate the trigger area. Okay, and that is it for all of the logic at the ground level of the toy box. Next time, we will work on the logic for the puzzle in the Sky Islands. Until then, I want to thank you for watching. Please leave a comment before you go, and let me know what you think of my Tron toy box design so far. Also, be sure to like and subscribe for more toy box builds like this, and don't forget that I have logic diagrams on my blog that may help you out if you're building this on your own system. Again, the link is in the video description. See you next time.